lovelies. This is your sunshine, Ray Johnson, and your luxurious star, Lauren Green, is not with us today because she's sick. But guess who is with us? Our special guest, Parker Newman. How are you today?
Hey Ray, I'm good. How about you?
Pretty good. And I've heard that you're doing pretty good because you have this new comic called City of Demons, and that sounds pretty intriguing alone.
I can give you the short of it real quick. Yeah, it's I was about to say, so yeah, it's essentially the story takes place in 1924 Los Angeles against the backdrop of old Hollywood, so silent
Mm-hmm.
era Hollywood, and it's really a story of how Hollywood or Hollywood Land, as it was called back then, became Hollywood, like the epicenter of American pop culture. Against that setting, we have a serial killer targeting the head mafia officials of one of LA's top two warring crime families. And the crime family that this serial killer is targeting is the mafia family that really established the studio system in Hollywood, that really established the movie in the early days of the movie industry. And the newly appointed head of that crime family enlists the help of two private detectives to find the killer. And so it's this really cool mystery against the political upheaval of these two warring crime families. One, of course, heads the studio system. The other heads more of the police force and the local businesses. And this sort of Game of Thrones esque back and forth. And so I think it's a story that people are really going to grab onto and really enjoy. The characters are very psychologically complex, and they're always put in situations to where they are put, have to deal with conflicting interests, are always put in scenarios that are very dramatic. And so there's nothing but drama and conflict throughout the story, and it's I think paced as so far as I'm told by people that have read it is paced pretty well, and yeah, again, cannot wait for people to experience it.
That's wonderful. And I'm very curious with you outlining such a cool world building element of bringing it back to the early 20s and such a nostalgic moment for Hollywood with its beginnings. I'm curious about what inspired you to bring it to that setting and also the world of involving mafia ties into it.
Yeah, so specifically that said, I'm a history buff. I think just a lot of the early days of Hollywood is very fascinating, especially its ties with the LA mob and a lot of the mob families. Just really, well, not so much LA, but within the whole western region of America. So that part is based on real history. There were mafia ties in the early movie studio system and a lot of the local business of LA. So that's true, and so that was always just part of history I thought really fascinating. It also helps that I'm also a movie buff, and so that intrinsically is tied into Hollywood, and I really love a lot of those the foundation that a lot of great films and great narrative storytelling were built from, that which even goes back to the silent era. And I think that's such an overlooked part of history, like specifically LA history, that we don't have enough media about. And again, 1920s, because that's also Prohibition era America, Roaring 20s, right? Only 10 years later is the Great Depression. So it's the big build up before the fall, and so that era is just right with all sorts of drama and all sorts of conflict to really dive into. And the the theme or the overall subject matter that I really want to highlight when doing this story was that the sort of predatory culture Hollywood has allowed to exist for a long time. Like the casting couch, or sorry, the casting chair, and all that sort of stuff has actually existed for forever, for as long as Hollywood's been around. I know we hear about it more with like the current P Diddy trial, the Harvey Weinstein scandal. I mean, there's already been a million. It feels like a million different cases have popped up about it, but that culture has existed in Hollywood for a very long time, and this story talks about that. And so it's cool because the story feels like it's almost more about Hollywood now than Hollywood back then. And so yeah, it's again, I can't wait to share with people. So yeah,
That is so intriguing, and a lot of what you said is very true, even though you're conveying it in such a creative and artistic way. A lot of those points are very valid with how you can see even now. the things that the industry has
Right.
gotten itself into. And I'm curious with your love for history and movies, your writing process when kind of storyboarding all of this before publishing, just the process of how you did that to, if anyone is listening, wants to do a comic themselves.
Yeah. So for anyone who doesn't know, this is my first ever comic ever. And also forgot to mention, so this story was actually derived from a script I wrote for one of our film classes back at High Point University. So this story has been in my mind, has been sort of circling in my mind for several years now. But yeah, so the process was essentially like, in terms of research, was you just have to research a little bit of everything, build a solid base, and then just figure out what to pull from. And to be honest with you, again, it's creative, but maybe what not to pull from. So you have to kind of like, this is not, no one should read this comic like a piece of history. Like, it's kind of the deal I say is like, there's like, two truths and four lies, right? Because again, like, it's part. I don't really call it historical fiction, but it's partly historical fiction. Like, it is pulled. Many of the characters are inspired from real life people. Some of the mob families are inspired by real life mob families, but they're not called the mob families, like the name specifically. Just to allow myself more creative freedom and how I go about the story. Um, like for instance, the central character. There's four main characters, but the first issue focuses on one.
Mhm.
Lucas Short, who, at least in the first issue, is a black detective in the LAPD. Now, a lot of people would think that, well, a black detective in 1924 is unrealistic, didn't happen. Well, it did. In 1918, a really cool piece of LA history, LA had their first ever black officer. And then I think by 1924, the guys, I think in 1918, his first name was Marcus. I forget his last name, but by 1924, they had four officers. So this is a really cool tidbit of LA history that I just drew inspiration from to create Lucas. Lucas is not based on any real person, but the creation of that character is based on real history. Um, Again, just a really cool piece I want to dive into. Um, Again, there are other characters that are just pulled from different inspirations, not just in history, but within fiction itself. So it's just that's just been a really cool process combining sort of purely fictitious elements with a real life setting, with some real life circumstances. And yeah, it's been a ton of fun. I think people really enjoy the history part of it. The scripts. I would love to show you the scripts. When I
Please.
send it off to the artist, for instance, one of our issues opens up with a jazz club, and they're serving alcohol. I know there's prohibition, but if you were rich, um, prohibition did not mean a whole lot to you necessarily. So drinks were still being served around, and sometimes out in the open. So not everyone had to use a super quiet speakeasy. So, um, so one of our issues, I think it's issue 3, opens up with a jazz club, and so when I, and this is, and when I wrote that issue, um, when I wrote it panel by panel, page by page, I sent pictures, reference photos to the artist in the script. I said, hey, because people are dressed up, and it's a period piece, so they're dressed up in very specific ways. The like even something like like the audio equipment's going to look a certain way. When we have a scene set on a movie set, the cameras are going to look a certain way. The lights are going to look a certain way. Everything is super specific when you do a period piece. The cars. I sent him a million. It feels like a million, reference photos to different cars from the era. Different phones from the era, different candlestick phones. And so just the jazz club, because there's so many people in it, there's so many moving parts to the scene as a whole, like the instruments and whatnot. I just shared him a bunch of reference photos of that time period, saying this is what this looked like, this is what women would dress in, like typically this outfit for this event, and this is what a typical suit would look like, which was hemmed a little bit differently. So just little details that I made sure that because the audience, while they may not see the behind the scenes of you going and doing the research, they feel the effect on the page, and they can feel when you're BSing them and when you're not. And I was like, I never want them to feel like I'm just being lazy. And so that was something I took great pride in. And yeah, I'm proud to say I think when you read it, you will feel it visually in every scene and every page. So yeah,
Wow, that's remarkable. There's a couple things I want to touch on. One is how you highlighted one of the main characters, and I think it's very cool how what seems to be a recurring theme with this comic is that you tend to highlight things that aren't talked about as much, and I think that's a pretty admirable thing to do in this like historical-ish fiction.
yeah,
And I also think that with opening up in a jazz club like that, it's very engaging, you know. I feel that whenever a movie has a party scene, you just know something's going to happen in one form or another. And
right.
I just feel like that's a very immersive way for the characters to interact as well in an environment like that. And with your reference photos and everything, when I did have some costuming and makeup work at High Point, it kind of brought up like, oh, the details need to be just right and stuff, so it looks
Right,
realistic, but no one's hurting themselves. And
right.
so I really appreciate that aspect of it too. And I'm sure your artist felt like he's probably living in the 20s at a certain point with all the photos you sent
Well,
him.
it was funny because there were moments where, and I've had to double check myself because again, there are so many moving elements when you write a single scene. Like just like even if you have a scene like at a debt, like in an office, and all may write something as general, like hey, there's personal knickknacks, on the desk. And I have to make sure when the artist actually interprets that and draws it out, I have to make
Mm.
sure that all this existed in that time period, because that's when I have to remind myself, okay, I need to be very critical to myself when I look at what I've written, making sure I haven't unintentionally used like really it's most of it's items, an item that didn't exist during that time period or something. So like for instance, another quick point about that was for the cover of issue 2. Another cool fact about 1920s America. So like crime scene tape, like the yellow tape in crime
Yes.
investigation, that
Mhm.
did not exist in the 1920s. I don't know if the material didn't exist then or something, but what they used is that wooden, essentially wooden barriers.
Oh yeah.
So that's what they used to set up the tape. So I remember the cover. Um, it's our another one of the characters, Lawrence K, who's a PI. He's
Mhm.
examining sort of the chalk outline of a body under a lamp. It's a cool cover, but the problem is the first had like this the crime scene tape, and I had to say my art. It was such a cool cover. I said I need you to take that out because it's not. They didn't have that. That's not 1920s. And it was so sad because it was visually really cool. I'm not gonna lie, it was like flying in the wind, and he took it out. So, but it's still a great cover. Yeah, but there's just been that very critical eye both him and I have had to take. So hope people will enjoy it and appreciate it because we put a lot of hard work into that element in particular.
Well, I feel that they definitely should because it's incredible just how much care you have for this project. And I'm
Yeah,
also very curious because you have been touching on it with the communication you have with him to make sure you're sharing the same vision of what you're conveying to him versus what he's
right.
drawing. Uh, when you were starting out, how did you guys find your footing with making sure you understood each other with how things would be portrayed?
Yeah, it's been one of those things where it's just been constant communication. When I write a script, uh, and for those who don't know, a comic book script is generally structured as like page 1. I want 5 panels in this page, and you write out each panel what that is. Like panel 1's a close up of his face. Panel 2's a close up of his hand reaching for a gun or something. And, panel 5 is a big wide shot. So that's the sort of structure of a comic book script. And so some writers are very flowery and they write it almost like they're writing a novel, and it's very dramatic. I don't do that. I write it very direct. I approach it as I'm having a conversation with the artist. And so I write it as I'll make notes. I'll write, hey, this scene, wide shot, outside, by beach, right? And I'll say, hey, Kingsley, look up some dramatic line effects we can have so we can create some really cool dramatic shadows, right? Like, hey, in the foreground, we'll have, can we put some in the foreground to give depth to this image? So I'll write him notes. Like, I'll call him by name. Hey Kingsley, can we add this little effect here? Can we do this little dramatic shadow effect? Because I always have an idea in my mind, and what he's so good at is really adding a layer of personality onto it. And so, what really ties in well with this is that when I was looking for artists on social media, I essentially I called audition, but I paid five different guys to illustrate the first, I think, three or so pages
Mhm.
because I want to see how they interpret my script. And Kingsley was by far the best, because what I had pitched and was my initial idea for the art style was it was going to be strictly two tone, hard blacks, hard whites, like that. That those were the only colors in the whole piece. Because I knew I wanted to make it black and white. For those who don't know, monetarily, it's really cheap. It's cheaper than color. Also, from publishing side, it's just cheaper to print. Also, I thought stylistically we could get away with it without looking cheap because stylistically, noir, detective,
Mm.
1920s, it fit perfectly. Like I almost like I could never imagine it being color, which is how dramatic the black and white looks. But Kingsley added a grayscale over it. So if you see like the pictures on the online on our crowdfunding campaign Zoop, it's not strictly harsh blacks, harsh whites. It's a grayscale effect, and he has such a great. There's a lot of values within it. So and he's great at that, and it's just phenomenal. Like it's something that I didn't think of that he added just him being himself as an artist. That I was like, just keep doing that. That there's another little small instance where every panel has a jagged white outline. I saw him do that once for one of the pages he turned in, and I just loved it so much. I just not it added a different sort of gritty edge, and I was like, I was like, do you literally do that for every single panel? Because I loved it, and so we still were about to finish issue 10. We're still doing it. Um, yeah, he's fantastic artist. Cannot say enough about him.
Well, congratulations for almost having 10 issues. And for Kingsley, feel like, you know, uh, he's going to have a bunch of people in comments now saying, deserves a raise. Oh my gosh, that's incredible. Like, just to hear how much care he has as an artist is very incredible because I've also have always appreciated art, so I respect people that can do that style and
Well,
make
and
it
he
their
also
own.
his work is so dynamic, and that's what's also great. Like his ability to translate the page to something very dynamic with just loads of energy is great. And with Kingsley, it was always great because I'm sure you've seen from the crowdfunding campaign the sample pages.
Yeah.
The artwork is great, and I kid you not when I say his artwork gets even better as the series goes along. Like it gets even better. Like he even asked me not too long ago. He said, "Can I go back to issue 1 free of charge and just change a few things?" And I said, "Well, to be honest, I told him it's too late. We were already turned it into the publisher, and we were just about to start the crowdfunding campaign." So I said, it's probably too late at this point, right?" So I said, "It's probably too late. We already turned it into the publisher. The publisher's happy with it. I was happy with the art, but he's a perfectionist, and so it's great. Um, yeah, he's phenomenal, and to work with him has been amazing because he he's also been very complimentary. He's been like he'll give me a lot of feedback. Be like, "Oh man, this issue turned it was really good," and he's like, "I really love the story you're telling," and because there was one time I asked him because we talked back and forth, right, about like, hey, what should the page look like or all this. But at some point, it was maybe by issue 4, we did not talk a lot about story. And he reached out to me on social media. I did not reach out to him at all. And he said, "Hey, I need to tell you something." And I was like, I thought the worst. I'm like, oh, he's gonna say he can't do the art anymore, or something, right? He's gonna say do it. And I'm like, oh, I have to find another artist, and I don't know if I can find one that I just connect to so well, like him. And he said, let me see if I can find it. But he essentially said was like, he's like, you're the best writer I've worked with so far. I was like, oh, he's like, I really love the story. He's like, I really love the story you're making. He's like, and I really believe it. I was like, that was not at all what I expected, and it was just something to where, and I've encouraged him to be more open about his thoughts of where the story was going, and he's been the biggest supporter, saying like, he's like, no, I love this. He's like your work, and he said the biggest compliment he said was, he said my scripts inspire him because he's like he knows it's good, and for him to he's like to work on something I know is good. He's like and could be really good depending on how we finish it. Because I and that's the thing like with a 12-issue series, and I've said this, it goes a TV show or a movie.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, yeah, it matters if you start out strong, but if you do not end it well, then it all means nothing.
Mm-hmm.
So I think our series so far is really, really strong. Fingers crossed. I think it will. We'll end it super, super well, and I think people will hopefully find it great. Because we've seen too many examples of something great not turn out to be great because of a bad ending. Game of Thrones.
Yeah, it's funny you did mention Game of Thrones earlier because I was thinking that as you were saying this,
Oh,
but
the ending's
also when it comes to when you talked about how you pay attention to details and earlier when
yeah.
you mentioned your conversation with you and Kingsley about the caution tape, I feel like that would have been the equivalent of the Starbucks cup in Game of Thrones.
Isn't that shocking? Because you feel like there are so many checks and balances on a set that big
Yeah.
that you're like, how the heck did something like that get? That was wild.
Literally the only thing I know from the show is that meme.
Oh, you haven't seen the show?
No.
Well, I mean, I will say this: I was a humongous Game of Thrones fan when it was coming out. Like, and I'm not one of these people that got on the bandwagon just before the last season ended. Like, I was there, almost, not quite, but almost since day one. I was like, this is great, and then the last season comes out, and it's the worst thing I've ever seen. But it ended so bad. Here's the problem: when your ending is so bad, because the whole show is building up to that.
Mm-hmm.
Um, it made it and almost it to this day it makes it impossible for me to go back to rewatch any of it because I know it leads to nothing good.
Mm.
I know that the story it's building up leads to nowhere. Like the inverse of that is Avatar: The Last Airbender. That ending is so amazing and pays off everything so well. It makes me feel good to go back and rewatch some of those earlier episodes because I know it leads up to it will lead to something good.
Mm.
I don't feel like my time's been wasted. Game of Thrones, the ending was so bad, it made me feel like I'm an idiot for falling so madly in love with these characters in this world. Gosh, yeah, let's move on. We could be going for like another hour about everything that ending did so bad.
That is very good point because rewatchability is just as huge as like the live numbers of a series because
Yeah,
you want to continue to love the characters and also the business wants to make merch. But I also think that with the overall storyline and clear passion that you have for your comic City of Demons and with Kingsley's immersive art, like pairing that with your writing and how you complement each other, and that's very sweet with how you guys appreciate each other. Seems like you're a dynamic duo, but I know the earliest TV Batman was in the 60s, so not quite the 20s, but Uh,
what's your
and
point, Ray? Just kidding.
I'm saying that you guys are an unstoppable pair, okay?
He's okay. I mean, he's okay.
You just
He,
went on for like 20 minutes about how amazing he is, and
he's fine. I mean, he's like fine. I guess. No, he's good. He's really good.
oh my goodness.
The weird thing about comics, and I'll admit to this fully, even as the writer, Todd McFarlane, who is the co-creator of Spawn. Well, I think no, just the creator of Spawn, and he also co-created Venom, and so he's a famous comic book artist. Todd McFarlane. He made a comment, and I don't agree with him on a lot of things, but he said that he can sell a comic if it has great art but terrible writing. he cannot sell a comic if it has great writing but terrible art. And to be honest, I actually agree with him. Like the art matters that much. Like even selling this campaign, you're not going to be able to read my writing, until the campaign is backed. And before the campaign is backed, all you have is to look at the art. You know what I'm saying? Like, so it's that part where it's like, oh, the art sells it 100% more than the writing. The writing sells it to, the writing gives it longevity. It gives it a true fan base, right? But just the initial sell to the public is strictly through the art. Because again, I'm not an established name in the comic book field yet, so still working up. But
That's right, yet.
yeah,
It's gonna happen. It's actually funny though with what you're
yeah,
saying about the art versus writing, because I've heard kind of a similar sentiment with videos and TV and movies and stuff. If the audio's really bad, people will hate it. If the visuals are kind of meh, then people will forgive it if the audio quality is just spot on.
yeah,
And that's something I've carried over to my podcast, and hopefully you listeners agree that the audio is good and the visuals can be more forgiving. Although, like with what you're saying with comic book art, I always try to make sure promotional stuff is spot on and things like that.
yeah,
And I loved creating the logo for this as well. So it's just little things like that where you can tell that much more how much the artist and the writer care, whether it's the same person, two different people, like your situation, and stuff like that. You can really just tell how much they love the characters, the readers, to make sure it's immersive as it is. And I really do think that people are going to enjoy this. I'm sure they already have, and I can't wait to hop on the hype train of this series too.
yeah, yeah. So again, I think I really believe in, like, it really is one of those stories and one of those series that even if you're not in the comics, so you went out there, I assume most of this audience is probably not your traditional comic book reader. It's not. Look, if you just enjoy great stories, you'll enjoy this. Like you do not need to like be the biggest comic book nerd or the biggest comic book expert to enjoy this. If you just enjoy great storytelling, you will enjoy this. And I truly believe that's one of those series that once people give it a chance, they will really latch onto it and they will really connect to it in a very strong, visceral way. And I'm really confident that the publisher is very confident in that. And also, as a side note, do you want me to this week? Because I think, do you want me to quickly tell you like the whole public? We've talked about this briefly before the podcast, but the publication history, because it is. Hopefully, people will be somewhat inspired by it or very depressed by it.
I mean, hopefully inspired. um, I'd love to hear about that because I know with novelists it
Yeah,
can be quite a process. So I can imagine that with comics it's quite
yeah,
interesting and different.
yeah. So the whole comic book process. So typically, like, look, if you're starting out, unless you have some weird or not weird, but unless you have some a strong family, like a weird in that most people don't have, like
Nepotism.
that. Yeah, yeah. But like, if you have like right, like a familial connection or something other than that, I don't know what that would be, but unless you have a family connection, your first comic or your first work in comics is not going to be DC or Marvel,
Mhm.
or really even Image, which is the third biggest publisher for that instance. It's just not going to happen. So that's not reality. So you have to start independent. And so for me, I sent out the whole package I had for like the pitch was the first 10 pages fully illustrated, fully edited. Was the first 10 pages along with a story pitch, which was like, your Corey letter. For anyone that's trying to publish a novel, they'll know what that is. It's like essentially your quick 2 or 3 line pitch, along with a fully developed story arc, which is a very detailed. Essentially, think of it as a more detailed outline of
Mm.
the whole series. So you have your story arc, you have potential. Some publishers ask for this, a character profile of all your main players, and you have a cover letter which highlights your background of each person of the team. Um, what else was? Oh yeah, and proposal, which is, I mean, it's just a lot of stuff. I mean, you have to. His marketing proposal was essentially your story. What is it like in the market that is similar to it? Because people like to sell things that are similar, that's like something else, so they better know how they can market it, as well as you can also put in there like your target audience and target age group and all that, target demographics, all that. Um, so I mean, once you get through all that, then you ship it off to publishers, and some publishers want a variation of that, so it's a different hurdles to go through. But generally speaking, that's the package they want. So I sent it off to a bunch of different publishers. Got rejection letters. I was very confident, but I got rejection letters to a point where I was like, God, am I just missing something? Because I think the package we sent in, like specifically the first 10 pages, are very, very strong. I was like, what am I missing? Really, I thought, am I too close to this? Am I too biased? And like, am I not realizing this just stinks? And so I got a rejection letter from one of the bigger independent publishers, and I was just frustrated. I was disheartened. So I never did this before. I typed back saying, "Hey, what did you not like? So just can you help me improve? Because I just want to know what I can improve. And what did you not like about it?" And the guy said he wrote back, which I was surprised he wrote back, but he wrote back to his credit a day later saying, "Hey, I actually really liked it." And I'm thinking to myself, I'm reading this like, so what's the problem?
Yeah.
Because he said he just really liked it. He's like, oh, there's no issues with it. He's like, I really liked it. The only problem was me. It
Okay.
was my first, yeah. Well, no, not like me as a person, but it
I was
was
gonna
my first.
say.
It was no. I mean, they don't get to know you as a person during this process, really. But the the problem was it was my first comic. Meaning, and again, from a
Mm.
business standpoint, I understand this. Meaning, I don't have a following who just will buy anything I write, so I don't have a fan base. Um, I'm also bringing, which means I'm also bringing a new property, City of Demons, which no one's ever heard of. And so I'm just too new that my name's not out there. I don't have a following enough to really guarantee great sales. So I understood it. I ideally wish he had more vision to be like, hey, there's a talented kid out there who's young. We can, build a business relationship early and just invest in him early because we feel like there's something here. But that's not how it went. But a little bit later, I got two offers from different publishers. Um, Both were bigger names in the independent comic field. I eventually went with a publisher called Blood Moon Comics, which was growing, but had a pretty dependent audience for horror comics. That's what they published, was horror, a lot of horror stuff. So my comic is not horror, but totally kind of fits in with the same audience.
Mm.
So I was like, okay, this could probably be a perfect fit. So fast forward about a year, because our release date was from a year. And to be honest with you, at that point we only had 10 pages made. So we were like, okay, now we have to finish a full issue and create a backlog of issues, which we now have, so that we can release this monthly. Fast forward a year, um, I reach out to my publisher. So we're 2 months away from release. I reach out to my publisher, Blood Moon, saying, hey, when can we start pre-order sales? And he emails me back going, hey, Parker, we're closing down.
Mm.
And I was like, oh. And so here's the reason why. And this will show you, to be honest, how stupid the comic book industry is run. The model of it is ridiculous. No other book sale model is like this at all. It's only comics. So the big distributor, and they had a true monopoly on North American comic book distribution, is called Diamond Comics. Diamond had a monopoly on the whole system, and I mean that, true monopoly. Like, it was only them. So companies would have a contract with Diamond, and so the process would go: a company would give them a book, And typically, Diamond would send the book around to different comic book shops and different, I guess, avenues and channels, and they would take a look. As far as I've been told, it's mostly they just look at the cover and they generate, okay, what should be the interest level beyond this, and Diamond will order a certain number of copies of that issue. The publisher then supplies them with what X number of copies that Diamond ordered, and then they ship it off. Meaning you're just strictly beholden to Diamond. Diamond can run up the cost like crazy on you because they've asked you to print however X many copies. So it's a ridiculous model. I don't know why comics allowed it to be like this. It's a silly, silly model. Um, anyway, Diamond had horrible mismanagement problems, and because of these and I mean like late deadlines, not delivering, mismanaging books, like not delivering, like for instance, Blood Moon, as far as I know, to this day, still has about 100 grand of comic books just in a factory somewhere, in a warehouse, just not being sold. And for these independent companies, they're not big, so that 100 grand means a lot to them. And it was just insane. And so totally mismanaged, meaning they lose their two big clients, Marvel and DC. So Marvel and DC lose, makes a majority of the comic space. They leave. Diamond's in trouble. Diamond gets declared bankruptcy. And so all these companies that had a contract with, exclusive, mind you, contract with Diamond, they're screwed. Mm-hmm. Like they can't deliver books anymore. And Blood Moon was one of them. And Blood Moon closed up shop. And it was just a bad day. Like it was just horrible. So I later reached out to a few comic book influencers who I went on their podcast and talked to them and whatnot. And I said, do you have any guidance? And one guy named Marcus told me to reach out to another comic book influencer named K-Pop, who was big in the independent field. And so I reached out to her, and she gave me a list of independent publishers to reach out to, top one being Wiseacre. And Wiseacre's who I'm with now. Thank goodness. Yeah, those have been a great partnership. And so, yeah, it's been a long journey. So anyone listening, like, I got so many no's. I hit so many, felt like brick walls again and again and again and again. Like there was a point where I was like, maybe this is just terrible and I should just give up. And I got a publisher, and I was like, oh, cool. And guess what? That went against my plans. I lost the publisher. I didn't lose it, but the publisher closed down. There were circumstances completely out of my control. I had inadvertently entered comics at maybe the worst time historically to ever enter comics. Oh, no. So that was cool. And, just luck of the draw. and so, and then, like, it's historically bad. And so, well, because I just said, like, look, I put so much time and effort into this, I'm not going to stop now. There's no way I'm stopping now. Mm-hmm. And this is something where, like, I'm not going to let, like, I truly believe, like, we're each masters, of our own fate, of our own destinies, all that kind of stuff. And it's like, I'm not going to let these outside circumstances dictate to me what I'm going to do. I'm just going to choose not to let that happen. And I mean, this sounds maybe a little hyperbolic because it's a comic book, but you know what I'm saying.
No, it's a good mentality to have, like with anything in life, honestly, and you gotta respect it, especially like you said, just the timing was oh so infamous, and I'm grateful that you saw the other end.
The timing was, it's funny, and I think, Ray, you'll understand this. All I feel is at some key moments in my life, I inadvertently was at the wrong place at the wrong time. Like for instance, when I entered in media production, like senior year of high school, entering in, the job market for that was at its peak. Never ever had it been higher, right? Mm-hmm. And then I get out, and there's there's a strike. Mm-hmm. So literally nothing for about a year. When we exit college, nothing's getting made. So it was the worst job market. It went from being the best it ever been when we entered to being the worst it ever been by the time we left. That's out of our control. We can't control that. There's nothing we can do. And with comics was a similar way. I entered it, not knowing, and not going to know. There was no way that I was entering it at the worst, historically, the worst possible time. And yes, I mean, yeah, like I allowed myself to be sad for it, for about just a day. And I said, okay, I just gotta grind, get back to work, figure this out. Because again, I truly believed then, and I still believe now, City Demons is very special, and anyone who gives it a shot will realize that. And again, everyone, you're probably going to hear Ray say it again, but if you haven't already, please go to Zoop, ZOOP.com. It's a crowdfunding platform that City of Demons is using. It's comic book exclusive crowdfunding platform. You're going to also find a ton of other great independent comics trying to get funded. But we are under, let me check, we are under $300 to our goal of 2,000, and
Wow.
we have 14 more days, so there's still time. So hopefully we get to meet our goal and beyond. And again, there are some great rewards you can sign up for. You can sign up to get a metal poster, get all this, sort of metal bookmarks, all these sort of little cool swag items. You get the comic, obviously, you get the comic book itself. Guys, please support this. It's been such a great passion project of mine for years at this point. And we are so close to meeting our goal. And I don't really have a doubt in my mind that we'll meet it, but I don't never say never. So
Okay, Justin Bieber.
Sure, that will meet the goal.
Well, I truly appreciate your time today and the journey you've outlined of real life and both the fictional life of your comic series. And I'm sure people will look forward to it, support it, and like he said, there's a couple of weeks left for this fundraiser, and throughout this podcast, I'm going to edit certain screenshots of things he's mentioned, and there will be a link in the description after the summary of this episode for this particular page on Zoop, ZOOP.
I have to say that because Zoop is so new in the crowdfunding space, typically like Kickstarter or for more personal stuff like GoFundMe.
Yeah.
So Zoop again is a new thing, and people who don't follow comics, I guarantee you will have no idea what I'm talking about. So that's again, yeah.
Well, now they will, because people will go and support this.
We're putting Zoop on the map, guys. We're doing it.
Let's put Zoop, City of Demons, and Parker and Kingsley, everyone involved, on the map. Well, we appreciate you, lovely listeners, to listening to something a bit different today. Usually, Laura and I talk about life and future things we hope to do, but now we're talking about different genres of life with comic books and Parker's aspirations. And we hope that you will continue to enjoy our next episodes where Lauren will be back and healthy and thriving and shining better than ever. I'm very appreciative for Parker, his returning guest slot here, and we'll see you guys next time. Bye!
Bye.